Greetings, Fire Chargers, Darkblade here, and I will now get into episode 2 of my Latin with Darkblade series. In this video, I'm going to explain how the verb system works. Now, Latin verbs each one has 4 principal parts, or 3 if it's deponent, assuming that it is not defective. The first principal part of a non-deponent, non-defective verb is the first person singular present indicative active. It always ends in a long letter O. The second principal part is the present infinitive active. It is these two principal parts that most of the present system aspect forms are made from. By the way, that includes the present, imperfect, and future tenses. The third principal part is the first person singular perfect indicative active, and the fourth principal part is the supine, which is a type of verbal noun. It is these two principal parts that the perfect system aspect forms are made of. And the fourth principal part is heavily employed in participles and perfect passive forms. Now, each Latin verb can be conjugated for 5 different dimensions. And by the way, to conjugate just means to make the different forms. It can be conjugated for person. Who is this? How many subjects does the verb have? Is it just one person who's doing the action, or is it multiple people who are the subjects? By the way, in deponent verbs, the 3 principal parts are the first person singular passive form infinitive active. It's technically the middle voice, because deponent verbs only have a middle voice, but the middle voice always has the same forms as the passive voice. The passive infinitive active and the first person singular or perfect infinitive passive. And semi-deponent verbs have the first 2 principal parts are like normal verbs, and the third principal part is like that of deponent verbs, and they don't have a fourth principal part. So back to the act that I was last talking about. So the 5 dimensions that a verb can be conjugated for are person, are number, how many subjects does the verb, is the subject just one person or thing, or is it multiple persons or things? Next, the person, who is the subject? Am I the one doing the action? That's first person. Is it you? That's second person. Or is it anyone else? That's third person. Listen, I might occasionally combine person and number as just one dimension, so it's more convenient. So the first person plural would be we, and the third person plural would be they. And the second person plural would also be you. Next is tense. There are 6 tenses. The present happening, which means it's happening right now. The imperfect means that it was in progress at some point in the past. The future means that it will happen at some point in the future. The perfect mean that it generally happened in the past, or what is it? Or is done happening as of the present and is no longer in progress. The pluperfect, which means it happened before another past event, and the future perfect, which means it will happen before another future event. There are also 3 different moods. There's the indicative, which treats the action described by the verb as a fact. Imperative, which treats it as a command, and to the hearer, and subjunctive, which is kind of fuzzy. We'll get into all the subjunctive uses in future episodes. The indicative has all of the tenses. The subjunctive has 4 of the tenses but does not have the future or the future perfect, and the Everything Learning Latin book doesn't feature the imperative mood as having any tenses, though Wiktionary conjugation charts do talk about a future imperative and also a third person imperative, I think. It's weird. Let me check just to make sure that what I said there was accurate. So I will use a sample verb, habeo. And yes, that was accurate. The Wiktionary does in fact recognize a future imperative and a third person future imperative, though it's supposedly the same form as the second person future imperative. Next is the infinitive, which technically isn't a mood, it just treats the action as... Let me read what it says here. As you can see, I am actively consulting the book. I'll pause. Here it says, page 119, they don't treat actions as anything at all. They don't even have a person or number. In English, infinitives are usually preceded by the word to, as in to walk, to cry, to sleep, and so on. Oh. Yeah, I personally find that part about English infinitives annoying, and it's not something that I will personally do. Let me see. And there's also voice. There are technically 3 voices. There's the active, in which the subject does the action of the verb. There's the passive, in which the action happens to the subject. And then there's the middle voice, which I'm trying to explain. The subject is both recognized as doing the action and it happening to them or affecting them in some way, though middle voice forms are always identical in appearance to passive voice forms. But that's not all there is to the verbal system. Well, it kind of is. there are also other things like participles, which are technically adjectives, and gerunds, which are nouns, and supines, which are also nouns.